Welcome to Wealth Made Simple with Shaz, where you'll learn how to master your money through business, property and tax saving strategies. Your host has collectively helped his clients make tens of millions of pounds in additional profits through these strategic approaches to business. Introducing Shaz Nawaz, an award-winning chartered accountant, property tax expert, entrepreneur and property investor.
Hello, welcome to the podcast. Today I'd like to focus on stamp duty land tax. And before I start, I just want to say that stamp duty land tax is a very complex area, and I think sometimes some advisors tend to simplify it and it isn't as simple as they make it out to be. I also think that sometimes accountants and solicitors tend not to understand all the rules and just follow the basics and kind of miss out quite a few opportunities. So I just want to pick on a couple of very common issues or areas which I think you ought to know about, and I'll run you through a couple of examples to help demonstrate the point. So before I start, there is sometimes a general misunderstanding that something called multiple dwellings relief, I say something, I mean a relief called multiple dwellings relief, there's advisors who sometimes tell their clients, or there's clients who think that you need to buy 6 or more properties in order for multiple dwellings relief to apply, and that isn't correct. The word multiple means 2 or more, so if you're buying 2 or more properties at the same time, you can use multiple dwellings relief, and I'll come on to that in a moment by sharing an example with you. Before we do that, let me just cover the 6 property rule. So if you buy 6 or more dwellings in a single transaction or a linked transaction, then you can use commercial rates of stamp duty. And the advantages of that are that the nil rate threshold for commercial property is £150,000 and not £120,000 as it is for residential property. So there's an extra £25,000 in the nil rate threshold. The second obvious benefit is that the rest of the balance above and beyond the £150,000, the SDLT rate on that is 5%. Whereas if you look at residential, you've got 2% after the initial 125,000 nil rate band on the next £100,000, and then it goes up and up and up to quite a high number. Whereas with commercial rates, it's just 5%. So there's a saving there to be had. And the third obvious and common benefit is that there's no additional 3% higher rate SDLT on a second or subsequent residence or purchase, as long as obviously you qualify for commercial rates. And this is probably the main advantage. So if you're buying 6 or more properties together or as a linked transaction, please do make sure you look at commercial rates to see if that works out to be more favorable. If it does, you can use commercial rates. If it doesn't for some reason, then you can use residential rates. But what you also want to bear in mind is that you could achieve more savings by using residential rates and applying multiple dwellings relief. So I very quickly covered that at the start in terms of buying 2 or more properties at the same time. And how this works is that you average out the purchase price and then work out the stamp duty and residential rates on the average price, and then obviously multiply that by the percentage depending on how much the property is worth. So let's look at an example. Let's say you're purchasing 4 dwellings, one for 150,000, one for 160, one for 175, and one for 195,000. The total consideration on those 4 works out to be £680,000. So if it's a linked transaction, the SDLT is out at residential rates on the total. So you would look at 680,000 minus the nil rate threshold, which, as I covered a few moments ago, is 125,000. That then leaves you with 555,000. You then pay 100,000 on the next 100,000. You'd pay 2% SDLT, which is 2,500. So sorry, 2,500. Then on the remaining 4,455,000, you'd pay 5%, which is 22,750. So in total, you'd pay £25,250 on the SDLT alone. Now let's look at applying multiple dwellings relief. So 680 was the total consideration. If you divide that by 4, that gives you an average purchase price of 170,000 per property. Now, of course, you're not paying 170,000 for each property, because like I said, the first one was 150, second one was 160, the third one was 175, and the fourth one was 195. So there's only one that's close to 170,000. But because you're allowed to average it, you just divide the price over the number of properties. So in this particular example, it works out to be £170,000. Then you look at the SDLT, so it's 170,000 minus the 125,000, which is your nil rate threshold, gives you £45,000. Times that by the 2% SDLT rate, because that's the threshold that it falls under, as in the remaining balance of 45,000, that gives you £900. So 900 now times by 4 properties, because we've worked out the average price of 170,000. So 900 times 4 properties gives you 3,600 in total. Whereas in the earlier example, the total stamp duty was 25,250. That gives you a massive saving, a saving of over £20,000. That is huge. Now, if you add another 2 properties at 180,000 each, for example, then your total consideration would be 1.04 million. And the reason why I've added 2 more is because now what makes it interesting is you can look at commercial rates, because you've got 6 properties. So if you use commercial rates, you do the 1.04 million less the 150,000, so a slightly higher threshold as we've covered earlier, and then the remaining balance times the 5% gives you £51,250 in SDLT. And if you now look at multiple dwellings relief, so the 1.04 million divided by 6 properties gives you an average price of 173,333. So the SDLT at residential rates after the first £250,000 nil rate gives you 48,333 at 2%, which gives you £966 per property and 66 pence. So you multiply the £966 and 66 pence by 6 properties, gives you total SDLT amount of £5,799 and 96 pence. So you've saved over 88%. It's very important that you do the maths on every single occasion to see which scenario works best for you. So I guess the main point there is, remember, SDLT or multiple dwellings relief applies when there's 2 or more properties and not 6. The next thing I want to cover is when you buy a house which also has a self-contained annex, and I've seen this on a number of occasions where somebody's bought a property and with a granny annex or a self-contained annex, and they've paid too much in stamp duty. Please do make sure you don't overlook the possibility of using multiple dwellings relief when you're buying a property with a self-contained annex. So let's say you're buying the property for £600,000. The total stamp duty on that transaction would be £15,000, which is quite a bit of money. But if the annex fulfills the HMRC definition of a dwelling, which basically is a building or part of a building which is suitable for use as a single dwelling or is in the process of being constructed or adapted for such use. So if that applies to your scenario, then you could be missing out on the additional stamp duty that you've paid. So on the face of it, a building with 2 separate dwellings would leave you open to the additional higher rate of SDLT, because obviously, as you know, if you have a main residence and you buy a second property, you pay the additional 3%. If you sell your main residence and replace it with another main residence, then you don't pay the 3%. If you keep your main residence for now and buy a second property, which is your main residence, on that you'd pay the 3% SDLT. And if you sell your current main residence within 3 years, then you can claim a refund for the additional 3% that you paid on your new main residence. So just be aware of those rules too. So in our example here, because you're buying a property or a house with a self-contained annex on it too, you'd be paying the 3% SDLT. But if it's not your if it is your main residence and you don't have another main residence, then obviously you don't pay the 3% SDLT. So just make a note of that. So how it would work is, because you're buying the two properties, one is the main house and one is the self-contained annex, what you would do is divide the price of the properties by 2. What that means is each property is valued, for the purposes of SDLT, or the average price for the purposes of using multiple dwellings relief is £300,000, and the stamp duty on that would work out to be £1,000 each. So on the two properties you'd be paying £2,000 and not £15,000 like I stated earlier, which would give you a massive saving of £13,000. If, however, the house and the annex are a second property, then the additional 3% is payable, and if you sell your main residence, which you're in now, then you can claim that back. The more expensive the property, the less saving that you have by using multiple dwellings relief, and in some cases you could end up paying more SDLT. So it's important you do the maths and you work out, can you apply multiple dwellings relief, and especially with the self-contained annex, because if it's not a self-contained annex, then you cannot apply multiple dwellings relief. If you're buying 6 or more properties, then look at whether commercial rates work better and do the calculation and see which one comes out the best for you, and then use that particular method. I hope you found that useful. Until next time, bye for now.
Thanks for listening to Wealth Made Simple. You can follow and contact Shaz on the Facebook pages Entrust Property Tax and The Profits Wizard. You can also find Shaz on LinkedIn, YouTube and Instagram. Alternatively, email him at shaz@aa-accountants.co.uk. Build your wealth by mastering money.